Welcome to our deep dive into happiness. We're going to be talking about what really makes people happy, not just fleeting moments of joy, but that deeper kind of sense of well-being. You know what I mean? And you've given us some really interesting stuff to work with, especially that YouTube video, the one about practical ways to be happier.
Absolutely. And I think it's really fascinating how the video mixes personal stories with, like insights from different books about happiness. It's a great place to start, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't shy away from some really thought-provoking ideas,
Yeah.
like the whole thing about how much our genes actually play a part in how happy we are. It's kind of like we each have this happiness baseline,
Yeah.
right? And it's different for everyone. The video even mentions a book called The How of Happiness. Does that ring a bell?
Yes, The How of Happiness. It's by Sonia Lyubomirsky, and it really explores this whole idea. Lyubomirsky's research suggests that up to, get this, 50% of our happiness is influenced by our genes, which is, a fascinating starting point. But it's
Hmm.
super important not to, oversimplify this concept.
50%. Wow, that's a huge chunk, right? I can totally see how that might explain why some people just seem to handle tough situations better, with more optimism. Like they have this built-in resilience. Makes you wonder, how much is nature and how much is nurture?
Absolutely. Our genes definitely set the stage. But that doesn't mean our happiness is set in stone. It's more like a starting point, not a
Yeah.
limit. This is where the other 50% comes into play and where things get really interesting.
Okay, so we've got this baseline. But then what? What about those big life events? The ones we always think will bring us lasting happiness, landing that dream job, finding the one, or even winning the lottery. Do those things, like the external things, actually make that much of a difference?
That's where the video gets into this thing that calls the 10% myth. It says that our circumstances, so things like getting married, getting promotions, even winning the lottery, only contribute about 10% to our overall happiness.
Hold up, only 10%. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
If all those big milestones only account for such a small slice of the pie, why do we put so much emphasis on them?
It's all thanks to our brains and how amazingly they adapt. It's called hedonic adaptation. We just get used to new things, good and bad. So that initial excitement, like from a new car or a promotion or, yeah, even a major life event, it kind of fades as it becomes our new normal.
It's like that new gadget, right? The
Yeah.
one you've been wanting forever. You finally get it, and it's awesome for a while. Then it just becomes like another thing.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's the same with negative events, too. We adapt, and our happiness levels usually gravitate back to, that baseline we were talking about.
Okay, so we've got 50% genetics, 10% circumstances. What about the rest? That other 40%. What fills that gap?
This is where things get really empowering. According to the video and the books it talks about, that remaining 40% is influenced by, well, us, our thoughts and our behaviors, the things we can actually do something about.
Oh, I like that. So we can't pick our genes, and we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to things and what we choose to do.
That's pretty powerful, right? I remember the video mentioned a bunch of practical tips. I'm curious to hear more about those.
Absolutely. It's helpful to think about them in two categories: actions we can take, and then mindset shifts we can make. Let's start with the actions.
Perfect. What are some things we can actually do, like right now, to be happier? What were some of the recommendations in the video?
Well, it starts with the basics, things we often forget about, like moving more, sleeping well, and eating healthy. Might seem simple, but, those things are the foundation of well-being, and we tend to neglect them. It's so true. We always complicate things, right? I know for me, even a quick workout makes such a difference mentally and physically. But what about sleep? I'm always fascinated by, why sleep is so important for happiness. What's the science behind that?
Sleep is actually really vital for regulating our mood. When we're sleep deprived, our emotions are all over the place, we get irritable, and it's way harder to deal with stress, like trying to run on an empty tank.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I'm not exactly the funnest person to be around when I haven't slept enough. And then there's the whole eating healthy thing. Seems obvious, but I'm always up for hearing more about how what we eat impacts our happiness.
Think of it like this. A balanced diet is like premium fuel for your body and your mind. The nutrients from healthy foods, they directly impact how we feel mentally and emotionally, helps us function at our best. It's about nourishing ourselves.
Makes sense. So, move more, sleep well, eat healthy. Seems like a good formula so far. What other actions did the video suggest?
It also talked a lot about the importance of community, feeling connected to others. We're social creatures, right? And having good relationships is like a key ingredient for happiness.
So true. I definitely feel a difference after spending time with friends and family. It's like a recharge. I'm curious, though, what about people who are more introverted? Does that still apply?
Of course. Connection doesn't always mean huge groups of people. It's about finding those meaningful connections that give you energy. Whether it's a small group of friends or, just catching up with one friend, it's all about nurturing those relationships.
I get it. Quality over quantity.
Mm.
So we've got moving, sleeping, eating, connecting, anything else.
The video also talks about giving back. Acts of kindness, no matter how big or small, have been shown to boost happiness.
I've definitely experienced that. There's something really satisfying about helping others, whether it's volunteering or just lending a hand. It always makes me feel good. Is there a reason for that? Like, scientifically, why does giving back make us feel good?
Probably a bunch of reasons, actually. Acts of kindness release endorphins, which, improve our mood. But it also connects us to something bigger than ourselves.
Like we're programmed to help others,
Yeah.
and it benefits us too. Cool. Okay, so we've got move more, sleep well, eat healthy, build a community, give back. Anything else in the action department?
The last action the video mentioned is all about creating a positive environment.
Oh, I've heard about this, the whole decluttering thing, right? Surrounding yourself with things you like. It's amazing how much lighter I feel when my space is organized.
Exactly. Our surroundings can really affect how we feel. It's about making a space that reflects, the kind of energy you want in your life.
So we've got a pretty solid list of actions.
Yeah.
Seems like a good starting point for anyone who wants to actually do things to feel happier.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious to get into those mindset shifts you talked about earlier. Those seem like they could be even more powerful.
You're right. It takes more internal work, but they can make a huge difference. It's about, rewiring our thinking. Ready to dive in.
Absolutely. Let's talk mindset.
Mindset shifts. It's all about, recognizing those thought patterns that might be holding us back from being happier and then figuring out how to change them. The video goes into a bunch of them, but basically they're all about having a more positive and resilient outlook.
Okay, I get that. But how do we actually shift those patterns? It seems like our brains are kind of wired to focus on the negative stuff sometimes.
That's where the video brings up this really interesting idea. It's called the happiness trap. Basically, it suggests that our minds are actually wired for survival, not necessarily happiness. And that's what can lead to those, unhelpful thought patterns you were talking about.
That's fascinating. Makes sense, I guess, from an evolutionary perspective. Back in the caveman days, it was all about avoiding danger and staying alive.
Mm.
Not exactly about stopping to appreciate the view.
Right. And even though we've, evolved way beyond dodging saber-toothed tigers and stuff, our brains still have some of those old survival mechanisms. They're always on the lookout for threats, even when there aren't any.
So how does that create this happiness trap? It seems kind of backwards.
Well, because of that focus on survival, our minds tend to latch on to negative experiences, worries, fears, even when they're not really helpful or necessary. It's like our inner critic is always, pointing out what's wrong or what could go wrong instead of letting us enjoy what's happening right now.
Tell me about it. That inner critic can be a real downer. Is there any way to, shut it up?
Actually, yeah. The video and some of the books it mentions, they offer some pretty practical strategies for managing those negative thoughts. It's not about ignoring them or pretending they're not there. It's more about learning to observe them without letting them take over.
That reminds me of mindfulness. Does that have anything to do with escaping this happiness trap?
Mindfulness is a big one. It's all about noticing our thoughts and feelings, but without judging them. By just observing them, we create some space between, the thoughts and how we react to them.
I can see how that would be helpful. It's like hitting the pause button before we, freak out about every little thing.
Exactly. And that pause gives us a chance to choose how we respond instead of just, reacting automatically. The video also talks about gratitude, which we touched on earlier. Focusing on what we're grateful for can help us shift away from the negative stuff and feel more positive.
Oh, I love gratitude.
Yeah.
I've noticed that even when things are tough, just taking a moment to appreciate the good things, even small things, can really change my mood.
Yeah.
Like a little boost of happiness.
It's those little moments that add up. Shifting our focus to the positive, even when things are hard, can make a big difference. The video also mentions self-compassion. It's another powerful tool for, dealing with the happiness trap.
Self-compassion? That's a tough one for me. We're always so hard on ourselves. Is it really as simple as being nicer to ourselves?
It's simpler than we think. It's about treating ourselves the way we treat a good friend. We all mess up, we all have flaws, and that's okay. It's about accepting ourselves, even the parts we don't like.
I'm sensing a theme here. It seems like a lot of these mindset shifts are about like changing how we see things, how we think about things, and being more accepting of ourselves.
You got it. It's about realizing that we have a choice. We can choose how we interpret things that happen and how we talk to ourselves. When we start to be more positive and compassionate towards ourselves, we can break free from those negative thought patterns.
That's pretty cool. We can actually change our own story.
Huh.
So we've talked about this happiness trap and some ways to get out of it. Mindfulness, gratitude, self-compassion. What other mindset shifts did the video recommend?
There are a few more. One that a lot of people struggle with is this idea of not seeking external validation. It's about, letting go of the need for other people to approve of us and finding that validation from within.
That sounds amazing, like
hmm
so freeing. I could see how constantly worrying about what other people think would make us unhappy. But is it really that easy to just like stop caring what people think?
It takes time, and it's not always easy, but it's worth it. It starts with noticing when we're looking for validation and asking ourselves why we need it. A lot of times it comes from like insecurity or feeling like we're not good enough. But when we build up our own confidence and realize our own value, we can start to let go of needing that approval from everyone else.
So it's about shifting the focus from what other people think to how we feel about ourselves. I like that. What other mindset shifts did they talk about?
This next one kind of goes along with the last one. It's about not taking things personally. It means realizing that other people's actions and words usually come from their own stuff, their own problems and experiences, not because of something we did.
Oh man, that's a hard one. I know I take things personally sometimes, especially if it's someone whose opinion I care about. How do we, like, toughen up without becoming totally uncaring?
It's not about not having feelings. It's about realizing that we don't have to absorb all that negativity. We can choose to let it go, knowing that it says more about them than it does about us.
Like a mental shield, right? Deflecting all that negativity.
Mm.
Makes sense. So don't seek external validation. Don't
Right.
take things personally. What else?
The video also talked about finding work that makes you happy. It's about making sure our work aligns with like our values and what we're interested in. When we have work that feels meaningful and we enjoy it, it makes a big difference in our overall happiness.
That's totally true. We spend so much time working, it makes sense that it would affect how happy we are. What about people who are stuck in jobs they don't like?
It doesn't always have to be about, quitting your job and doing something totally different. It might be about finding ways to make your current job more meaningful or like looking for opportunities to learn new things within your field. Or maybe it's about finding things you love to do outside of work, hobbies, volunteering, creative stuff. The important thing is to find activities that bring you joy.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's about designing a life that feels right, both at work and outside of work. I like that a lot. Any other mindset shifts to explore?
The video suggests a couple more that are really helpful for becoming more resilient. One is embracing challenges, like actually seeing them as opportunities to grow.
Wait, how does facing challenges make us happier? Seems kind of counterintuitive.
It's all about how we look at it. When we see challenges as chances to learn, grow, and become stronger, we can actually find something good in even the tough stuff. It's about focusing on what we learn instead of just dwelling on the hard part.
So instead of why me, it's what can I learn from this?
Hmm.
I like that shift in thinking. What else?
This last one might seem a little weird, but it's really powerful for finding peace and happiness. It's the idea that life is not an emergency.
Whoa, hold on. Deadlines, bills, responsibilities.
Uh,
It definitely feels like an emergency sometimes.
It's all about perspective. We get so caught up in the daily craziness that we react like everything's a crisis. But if we take a minute to look at the bigger picture, we usually realize that most things aren't as bad as they seem in the moment.
So it's about finding that calm in the middle of the chaos.
Exactly. And when we're calmer, we can make better decisions and handle things better. So we've covered a lot: mindfulness, gratitude, self-compassion, not seeking validation, not taking things personally, finding work we like, embracing challenges, and remembering that life isn't an emergency. That's a lot of tools for being happier.
It is. And I'm already feeling better just hearing about them.
Yeah.
But before we move on, I'm curious. The video also said that happiness is different for everyone, right? It's not like one size fits all.
Yeah, it stresses that happiness comes from within us and it should be defined by us, not by what other people think or what society tells us. What makes one person happy might be totally different for someone else.
So it's not about trying to be like those perfect people we see on Instagram. It's about figuring out what truly makes us happy as individuals.
Exactly. And that might be different for everyone. Some people love being alone, others love being around people, some love being creative, others love helping others. The key is to figure out what brings us joy and then do more of that.
That's refreshing. It takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
We don't have to fit into some mold.
Yeah.
It's about creating a life that feels authentic and joyful for us.
Right. It's about aligning your life with what you value, what you love, and what makes you happy.
I love that. It's like we're taking charge of our own happiness. But before we wrap up this part, I have one more question. What about those genes we talked about, the whole 50% thing?
Mm.
Can we really overcome that if our happiness baseline is lower because of our genes?
That's a really good question. Genes do play a role, but it's not the whole story. We'll talk more about that in part 3 and how even if we might be genetically predisposed to be less happy, we can still cultivate a more joyful and meaningful life. Welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about how much our genes actually affect our happiness, right? And you asked a really good question, like, what if our happiness baseline is lower because of our genes? Does that mean we're stuck?
Yeah, it's a big question, right? Like all the stuff about changing our mindset and taking action is great. But it makes you wonder if some people are just like wired to be less happy.
That's a common concern. And yeah, we can't ignore the role of genetics, but remember, it's not the whole picture. It's like, think about a house, right? A strong foundation is important, but it doesn't dictate what the whole house is going to look like.
So it's more like a starting point, not the finish line.
Exactly. And that's where the 40% we've been talking about comes in, the part that's influenced by our thoughts and behaviors. Those tools and techniques we discussed become even more important if we're dealing with a genetic predisposition that might make it harder to feel happy.
It's like if happiness is a muscle, maybe some people start with a weaker one, but we can still work it out, make it stronger.
Love that analogy. It might take more effort, more consistency, but yeah, we can build a happier, more fulfilling life, no matter what our genes say.
That's encouraging. So what are some things that might be especially helpful for people who are like facing those genetic challenges?
Well, the sources we've been looking at, they suggest a few things. One is figuring out what our own personal happiness triggers are, like what specifically makes us feel good.
So finding those activities or places or even people that just like light us up, right?
Yeah, it's about paying attention to those times when we feel genuinely happy, energized, alive. And then once we know what those triggers are, we can make sure we have more of them in our lives.
Like creating our own personal happiness plan. Love that. What else might help? Especially for those of us who need a little extra boost.
Another thing they emphasize is resilience. Being able to bounce back from setbacks and challenges.
I've always admired people who are resilient. It's like they have this inner strength that helps them get through tough times. Is that something we're born with or can we learn it?
There might be a genetic component, yeah, but resilience is also a skill. And a lot of the things we talked about already, mindfulness, positive self-talk, seeing challenges as opportunities, those all contribute to being more resilient.
So basically all that stuff helps us become more resilient too.
Absolutely. It's about changing our mindset so that we see challenges as temporary roadblocks, not like, the end of the world.
Yeah, instead of why me, it's what can I learn from this?
Exactly, and that can make a huge difference. The sources also talk about how important it is to ask for help when we need it, whether it's from friends, family, a therapist, or even a support group. Having people we can rely on can give us so much guidance and encouragement.
Sometimes we just need someone to remind us how strong we are,
Right.
or to help us see things more clearly.
Totally. And that support can make a big difference in how we handle things and how we find happiness.
Wow, this whole deep dive has been so interesting. We've learned about genetics, circumstances, the power of our thoughts and actions, and even those sneaky survival mechanisms that can mess with our happiness. Before we wrap up, what's the biggest takeaway for you from all this?
For me, the biggest thing is realizing that happiness is a journey. It's not like we get there and then we're done. It's about doing things every day, little things to take care of our well-being.
So it's about enjoying the ride, not just focused on the destination.
Exactly. And remembering that we all have the power to create a happier life no matter where we start. That's what I love about all this. It's empowering.
I agree. This deep dive has given me so much to think about, and I'm definitely feeling inspired to put some of this into practice. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. And remember, the best time to start is now. What's one small thing you can do today to be a little bit happier? Until next time, keep exploring.